My name is Liddy Carter, and I am the Managing Director of Enhanced Capital and also the Executive Director of the Crossroads Venture Group. And I want to thank Proton Energy, Rob Friedland, for having us here tonight. I love this event. This is the only event where I'm actually a speaker, and that's not why I love it. I love it because I just think when you are talking about things that have a business model that works, those are things that you need. And those are two things, energy and food, that I know will have a market forever. So that's why I focus on those two areas of investment. What we're gonna do on this panel is ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and then I have a few questions and ask the audience to contribute your questions as well. So, Rob, would you like to talk about Proton and
Sure.
Also sort of you a little bit?
Sure. Everybody hear me, I hope? I have this thing right here. So, well, first, welcome to Proton. I know many of you took advantage of the tour, and hopefully that will generate some questions as well. So I'll be around for a while after to help answer questions on anything you saw or think you saw. So Proton's been around since 1996. I'm one of the co-founders of Proton. I'm actually joined on the panel here by Trent, who's another one of the co-founders of Proton, now off with Sustainable Innovations. And we've been doing the same thing really since our founding, which is water electrolysis-based hydrogen generation. So we build machines that take hydrogen from water. We do some stuff with nitrogen and whatnot as well. And really we've built our business, and the machines you see in the back are selling into sort of, we have really three legs to the stool that are growing right now. One of them, the first two are in the commercial sectors, which are the analytical chemistry market, where we sell products into gas chromatography and liquid chromatography markets, and that's growing very much for us, and it's something we've been involved in for a number of years. Our larger machines move into industrial spaces for electric generator cooling at power plants. Most people don't realize that over 70% of the electric generators in power plants around the world are actually cooled using hydrogen gas. So hydrogen, we sell equipment into for folks to make their hydrogen for cooling their generators. And then of course the energy side of the business, which is now really starting to come to the fore as we're developing a megawatt scale electrolyzer, the largest PEM electrolyzer ever developed, and will be available from Proton next year, is really aimed at renewable energy storage in terms of storing excess electrons from the renewable grid, fueling for fuel cell vehicles, and we have a fueling station here as a prototype and 13 Toyota vehicles that you'll see running around that we've been driving for a few years. And then the other thing sort of related to the previous panel is we work with the biogas industry in taking the waste CO2 that comes off the biogas plant, because when they're converting, about 50% of the process efficiency is waste CO2. And in countries like Germany, we can take that CO2 and combine it with hydrogen and create synthetic methane to inject into the natural gas grid in places like Germany, so they don't have to import it from Russia. So where that is a big play, that's becoming a very, very interesting play for us in and around Europe, especially Northern Europe. So many different elements to the energy side of the business that are growing, and Proton's was 82 people at the beginning of the year. We're heading towards 100 people at this stage, so we've been growing both in the people side and the revenue side. So we're happy where things are, but still a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Rob. Proton is certainly a leader in taking fuel cells and the whole electrolysis process beyond prototyping and becoming really viable businesses, and that's one of the things Connecticut stands out for, is the viability of our fuel cell business in general. Allie, would you like to talk about how the state's helping finance these projects?
Sure. So, hey everyone, I'm
Allie.
Lean
Forward.
Oh, sure. I work on the finance team at the state's Green Bank. We've recently changed our name in legislature, so now we're officially the Connecticut Green Bank. We were previously the Clean Energy Finance and Investment Authority. And what we do is we're really put on earth to solve what is called by Richard Kaufman, who now helped start the New York Green Bank, the Unnatural Act, which is committing capital for an operating expense. So we try to create innovative structures where we can take risks that maybe the private sector isn't willing to take, to deploy clean energy at scale in a way that makes sense for the end users. And we do that across 4 different verticals, and they're kind of the real estate verticals. So residential, commercial and industrial, the mush market, and grid and infrastructure. So
The mush market?
municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals. I'm actually lobbying to change it to the smush market, so states, municipalities, universities, and hospitals. And we also have a small microgrids program that I'm helping to lead up, which is looking at how we can deploy microgrids at scale. So that might be one of the reasons I'm on the panel, even though I know very little about technology. And one of the kind of notable things we've done in fuel cell was we supported the 15 megawatt Bridgeport project that actually was placed into operation in January. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Thanks, Alan. That's great. And Trent, tell us about sustainable innovations.
Sure. As Rob mentioned, I was one of the co-founders of Proton Energy Systems, and I've got to say I'm really proud to see some of the developments that have occurred here over the years. Since then, I've left and I've started a company called Sustainable Innovations, and really what we're all about is transforming fluids and power into higher value forms. And what we've done is we've leveraged fuel cell technology. I've done something a little bit different with it. We've developed an electrochemical system that uses this technology, and we're focused on 3 different applications using this technology. First, we're able to take waste hydrogen from different industrial processes, and we're able to electrochemically recover that hydrogen at very low cost. In fact, the cost to recovery of hydrogen using this process is perhaps 50% down to maybe even 1/5 the cost of buying new hydrogen using the process. Second, we can take waste CO2 from flue gas or other processes, and we can convert that CO2 to fuels and commodity chemicals for about half the price of delivered commodity chemicals. And then finally, we can take the same electrochemical system and modify it slightly and use it as an energy storage system. And we're doing a lot of that work with 2 very large international corporations to create essentially a flow battery system for grid-based energy storage and renewable-based energy storage. So we're a small company. We're about 20 people. We're based in East Hartford, Connecticut.
Thanks, Trent. It's a small but really important and very innovative company. I've seen the product several times. It's quite impressive. You know, one of the problems that I'd like the panel to address is financing. We are, after all, a financing organization. Financing fuel cell projects. We've got a couple of challenges in the market. One is very cheap natural gas as an alternative. And I think Blake mentioned that earlier. The combined heat and power gen sets always give fuel cells a run for their money. At least in this country, where natural gas is unnaturally cheap compared to the rest of the world. And yet we've seen in the last few years, particularly this year, the implementation of a large, viable, industrial scale, utility scale fuel cell deployment for the first time. We've seen tremendous growth in the stock prices of a number of fuel cell companies. I mean, extraordinary, explosive growth. Fuel cell energy in the beginning of the year had the highest value growth of any company in the entire American stock market. So I'd like to know what you all think about what it is that is suddenly changing the dynamics for fuel cells, the viability of fuel cells, and how you see that continuing in the face of continued low natural gas prices. You can also, take a jump.
Well, I think for us, it's we really see it as these technologies moving into commercial markets. So in other words, it's fuel cells have been technology reliant on government funding and demonstration programs and forever. And while that is still an important, I mean, the wind industry has certainly moved on. I mean, there's still an important research element to this technology because it's not static. Companies like Plug Power are moving into higher volume forklift fuel cell opportunities and signing up really good customers like Walmart, Cisco, and BMW and getting larger contracts. So the commercial marketplace is voting. Fuel Cell Energy is doing that with larger placements of their products as well. And so are we in terms of really solving real problems, not just betting on, while we're big proponents of the car, the car is not the lead story that we start with when we talk to investors. It's sort of the footnote because you need to bring the reality of products and markets to this sector, and you need to start seeing our companies start to get profitable. Proton's been profitable since 2011, which is unheard of in our industry, and that's why most of you haven't heard it. But all the companies you just mentioned are still burning a tremendous amount of cash, and that needs to change. They're threatening to become profitable, and some of them by the end of this year or early next. And I think that's really the next watershed event for these companies to start being valued and returning something to, and not just burning cash. So I think that's kind of the shift we're seeing domestically, in my opinion.
So I would argue that it's not exactly not reliant on government funding. I think no more is the research necessarily reliant on government funding, but for instance, the Bridgeport fuel cell deal came out of Project 150, which was basically a mandate to the utilities to buy 150 megawatts of power from clean energy sources, including fuel cells. We have in Connecticut an LREC program that's pretty generous. It's about between 50 and 75 cents per kilowatt hour. So there's still a lot of support, and I would argue it's not unlike what we saw with solar maybe 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago now. But really what you're starting to see is the commercialization of the technology. People are worried less about the viability of the technology and more about the viability of the companies. So I think, for instance, in the fuel cell deal, we had insurance basically on the performance of the fuel cell because, who knows if fuel cell energy will be around in the next 20 years or not. So those are the problems that we're starting to try to solve rather than the technology. And I think at that point, maybe it's the next wave after solar.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. There's been a huge transformation in terms of I guess I'll call it the commercial readiness regarding fuel cells. I started in this industry about 3 decades ago. And when I started, I was working with many of the folks who were involved in working on the Gemini fuel cell. And these guys were, PhD scientists who were involved in working on these very high-tech fuel cells for space. The materials involved were very expensive. The designs were very exacting. And the technology was very, very advanced at the time. The customer for fuel cells was one customer. It was the U.S. government. So they could pay exorbitant prices for fuel cells. Years later, people sort of caught the fuel cell craze at the turn of the decade. And companies that became involved in fuel cells thought, well, all we have to do is reduce the cost of the materials that go into fuel cells and reduce the cost of the design, and we've got it. We're ready for commercialization. Well, people found out that there's a lot more to it than simply reducing the cost of the materials involved in the fuel cells, because they shipped product and the product failed. Investors really lost their confidence in fuel cells and were unwilling to invest in the product at that point in time. So it took a while for the product to sort of catch up with the customer need. And I think we're at the point now where the product really has caught up. The technology has become a lot more advanced, and the customers are much more accepting of a new technology solution to meet their needs. And now the investment is finally coming.
Well, Trent, I have to ask you to get a little more specific, because the markets in this industry of fuel cells are so divided between mobile or transportation versus stationary, and the applications that Rob was talking about in sort of energy generation or gas generation are, they're completely different. So my question is, what do you think are the big opportunities in this space? Where is the technology really advanced enough, and where does work remain to be done?
Yeah,
where should I invest? That's really the question.
Yeah, I think there are some niche applications at first, and I think there are some larger ones that are really significant. In terms of advanced and significant opportunities, I think electrolysis is one of them. I think big electrolyzers are a real significant opportunity right now. I think there are opportunities in stationary markets where fuel cells that can perform more than one function can be a significant opportunity. I think many folks have looked very carefully at backup power markets, and there are segments within the backup power industry where fuel cells can be a real good match. And selfishly, the market that we're going after, which is an adjunct to the fuel cell industry, where you're actually using fuel cell technology for recycling purposes, is a really good match for fuel cell technology and can open up very, very substantial market opportunities. Mm-hmm. It's a billion-dollar industry.
So Ellie, you mentioned something about the microgrids in Connecticut. Where do you see that activity right now?
Yeah, so I'll say that I think reliability is really a huge application, especially in the Northeast for fuel cells. So in our PACE program, we usually see solar and energy efficiency, and we've actually started to see an uptick in fuel cell applications for industrial facilities because they want to be able to stay up and running in the event of a blackout. We haven't actually seen any fuel cells yet in the first round of DEEP's microgrid program, but we're hoping that changes with this round. But I think that's a huge kind of, maybe right now it's a niche application, but I think it could ultimately be, a main market application of fuel cells. So I would also argue that we've kind of been, I think the fuel cell industry and industries kind of at this juncture have been given kind of a gift in the sense that we have really low interest rates right now, so capital is relatively cheap, and you can try a few different demand aggregation models. So you can go out there and say, okay, let's see if fuel cells plus CPACE works, for instance. And I think that's kind of, it's a good time to be in this industry.
Rob, what do you think? What are the hot spots in fuel cells?
Well, I think the forklift market's an interesting one, and it really hasn't been, it's kind of it's not a sexy market, but the value proposition is really strong in terms of replacing lead-acid batteries in forklifts in large distribution centers with fuel cells. And again, you look for certain signs, right? I mean, you look at who's doing it, and Walmart's beginning to convert. Now, Walmart doesn't do anything kind of knee-jerk, so it's and you look at that just like you would look at if Apple or somebody moved into a space, or as you look at fuel cell cars, when Toyota says they're going to make a fuel cell car, that carries a little bit more weight, no offense, than Tesla. I think so you're seeing that. So I think the forklift market is really exciting. I think the large stationary market is also pretty exciting, and I do think the government's role shifting to incentives and recs and tax credits and things to spur investment as opposed to grants and buy downs and aggregated handouts, I think is better, because you have to be you have a project that has to meet performance requirements to be able to do it. It's just not we tried and it was a neat experiment, but it didn't work out. So I think those are all nice things that are happening. I mean, in the United States for electrolysis, ironically, and energy storage, this country is wedded and fixated on batteries, and we're not going to change their mind. So we take our little energy storage bat and ball and we go play in Europe, and in China, and in places where electrolysis is really looked at, much broader. Though it will continue to be, and eventually will be much more opportunity in the U.S. in energy storage for hydrogen. But again, I think at this stage, they love the batteries that exist only on PowerPoint slides, but That's what they love. So we'll let them go try it.
And that's a really important point because the market dynamics for fuel cells and hydrogen are very different internationally than here in the US.
Yeah, that's very true.
So speaking of batteries, this is my last question, so you guys get your questions ready. But I keep reading Elon Musk saying that batteries are going to do the car thing, and that's all that's going to matter, and we shouldn't even be thinking about the hydrogen fuel cell car. And I just know, as a person who has a lot of range anxiety all the time from my electric vehicle, that something's got to change there. So what do you guys think about cars and hydrogen cars and the implementation prospects?
So the hydrogen car is going to get its day in the sun, no pun intended. I mean, we're going to see Toyota's coming out with vehicles, Hyundai is, Honda is. So you're getting these vehicles that are really coming out into showrooms. Toyota's actually moving their schedule up. So they're going into California, and you may see vehicles in the Northeast as early as next year. In Connecticut, we're working closely with some of the vehicle manufacturers to see about doing that. So these are real commercial production vehicles. The vehicle I drive, which is one of the Highlanders that's outside, I get 340-mile range on a tank of hydrogen. Put 5 kilograms of hydrogen in it. It takes me 3.5 minutes to fill up, and it costs me the same as a tank of gasoline. So when I drive that vehicle, aside from all the logos on it, there is nothing physically different than driving that car than a gas-powered car. You will never be able to say that, no matter what Elon Musk says, unless he reinvents physics, with a battery-powered car, or unless it's a really big battery car with a really big battery being towed behind it. You'll never get 350 miles on a battery. So not that any of you would actually sit next to that could possibly generate it. There's probably a flow battery that Trent can come up with that might get you there. But anyway, I think, so that's the real technology thing. So it's going to get its shot. Is it going to work? There's a room for electric cars, there's room for hybrid cars, and there's room for hydrogen fuel cells. But I think they're going to get their play. The infrastructure is not as big a problem as everybody wants to make it out to be. And as soon as you reach a minor tipping point, the oil companies will engage and the infrastructure will get built out in about 24 months.
So Allie, are you going to fund that?
Well, so I was just going to say, there's not enough government money in the world to fund all of the infrastructure to replace the ICE refueling stations. So there has to be a business model there, and maybe it's the oil companies for the hydrogen vehicles, but if you think about the issues electric vehicles are having, again, there's no demand aggregation, so if you want to find a business model for refueling stations or charging stations, you need to figure out what your cash flows are going to look like in the future. All financing is packaging up future cash flows. And so unless you know for certainty what that kind of load curve will look like or what the refueling, I don't know, line for refueling will look like, you're not going to be able to finance them. And I don't think there's appetite on the public side to fund 100% of the capital cost there. So that's going to be the challenge. And I think, again, I think now is a good time to be experimenting with those demand aggregation models.
What I can say is that what we see relative to fuel cell vehicles is really the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of work going on within the bowels of the automakers right now in terms of developing the product itself. A lot of folks still working on it within the automakers. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay, are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, for Trent. My name's Bob Lawrence. Trent. Nice to meet you. You mentioned that you could take waste CO2 and convert it into fuels and chemicals. Yeah, you mentioned that you could convert CO2 to fuels and chemicals. Given that the EPA designated CO2 as a pollutant several years ago, why isn't that moving quicker?
As far as our technology is concerned? Yeah, you know, we started that work only about 4 years ago. So we're just now sort of moving through the laboratory activity and maturing it. And the thing that's holding it up at the very moment is capital. So we've just initiated a Series A raise. So for all of you out there who are interested in talking to me later about it, happy to talk. And we just started that a month ago.
Thank you.
Well, go ahead.
Can you convert the 5 the grams into 300? What exactly is that cost to you? If you're going to pay for it.
Yeah, okay, so what we charge out here is we charge $10 a kilogram. We control the spot price of hydrogen in Connecticut. So we charge $10 a kilogram, and so it would be $50 to put 5 kilograms of hydrogen in your car. And that's basically equivalent to $3.80 gasoline, because you're about 2.6 times more efficient in terms of the conversion of hydrogen to gasoline. So, where I'm putting 5 kilograms of hydrogen into my car, that would be roughly equivalent to like 13 gallons of gasoline. So the Highlander probably more like 6 and 15, but nonetheless, it's so that's really the math. And again, hydrogen will be sold on a retail basis based on what the companies are looking at and what the government's looking at, and the automakers want, probably somewhere between 8, 9, 10, 11, in that range, dollars per kilogram. So what hydrogen won't be is it's not meant to be demonstrably cheaper than gasoline. What it's meant to be is a fuel that you can put out there that's not going to be plus or minus 40% over the course of 9 months every year. So if you ask most people, well, not in Europe, because in Europe they pay $8 a gallon, but if you ask most people in the US, if you said, look, you're going to pay $4 a gallon of gasoline, but you're going to pay it for the next 5 years, could you live with that? People will obviously like it cheaper, but that's kind of a little bit of the pay to play. So you're going to see it in that range, and of course you can make hydrogen on site like we do, or you can truck it in. So you have many modalities in terms of how you can bring the hydrogen to the fueling station and deliver it into the vehicle.
Ross?
Is it practical to buy a small fuel cell and put it in my garage and generate my own hydrogen to run these cars? Quite practical. Put a dollar sign.
So we've built those before. The answer is no, it's not really practical, because you got to think about the fact that you have to generate the hydrogen from water and electricity, even if you have solar on your roof. We've run those scenarios for some of the car companies, and we don't believe that it's practical to get much below $5,000 or $10,000 for a unit like that would go in your home. And the best you would do is slow fill over a period of time, because you have to pressurize to a pretty high level to be able to fast fill your car. So you'd essentially create something that was very expensive, that was the equivalent to a battery charger, and you would only get probably 1 kilogram overnight or 2. So we don't really think that is a real attractive market to run at. We do have a home fueler at our owner's house. Our owner, I should have mentioned, is the chairman and founder of the Lumber Liquidators flooring chain, and he lives in Miami Beach, and we put a fueler at his house that he uses to fill up a vehicle when we can get one down there for him. So we can do it, but it's not something I see as a big market opportunity.
There was, yes.
I had a question on the Readiness project. What I've read online, it seemed like part of the rationale is that Connecticut businesses are starved for electricity because so much is being soaked up by New York City. Is that true? And if it is, are there other regions in the country that you would imagine that are similarly in the shadow of a major metropolitan area that might need microgrids?
Okay. So I think the reason that DEEP is putting so much money behind the microgrid program is because of all of the grid outages we've had. So I personally was without power for about a week in rural Connecticut in a snowstorm. And I think a lot of other people, that's not like an uncommon thing. I think a lot of other people had that, which translates to a lot of angry constituents, which translates to a government mandate from Dental Malloy. So I think that that's the reason. So I don't know if you have a specific question on the microgrid being developed in Bridgeport.
Well, and just from the resilience standpoint, are there other Connecticut sort of interests that get built out? Are there other places in the country that you see as kind of partners like grids that go along the same lines that you want to be developed?
Yeah, sure. So I think anywhere where there's been extreme weather is probably a good play. I think NREL did a study recently on where solar plus battery backup is competitive with the cost of power per grid, with the cost of power from the grid. I think right now it's just Hawaii, but pretty soon you'll see kind of California, the Northeast, all of those places might be, good economic places to build a microgrid as well.
Yes?
A little bit broader.
Can you speak up?
Sure. One last little bit broader question and then bring it back. We're talking about the need to invest over the next 35 years, an average of $1 trillion a year in clean energy in order to be able to meet the goals of the international goal of keeping CO2 concentrations below 450 parts per million. To get to that $1 trillion a year, we're around 250 billion right now. What do we need to get investors to put that in? Do we continue to need the government subsidies for these programs, things like renewable portfolio standards, and do we need a cost of carbon? Or if not, what are the investment opportunities out there to help meet this demand for clean energy that can be provide a significant investment return?
Yeah, I guess I would. My feeling is that you have to reach a tipping point before, and then I think once the ball gets boulder gets to the top of the hill, I think you'll have a much easier time. But to get that boulder to the hill, I think to the top of the hill, you're going to need more mandates, and you're going to need a tax on carbon or some form of legislation. I mean, Germany has a lot of needs now because the renewable, they're experiencing the brownouts and the problems of an unstable grid because they're shutting off their new plants while they've added renewables to the tune of 28% of their grid. So they have a real problem with energy storage. But even there, where the problem is acute, the reason that it's actually moving forward is there's legislation on the books to incentivize for stranded renewables, for biogas to convert it to natural, convert it to synthetic methane. There's incentives or penalties for CO2 emissions, for carbon on power plants, as well as for these biogas plants. So even there, where the problem is acute and the need is real, and energy costs are 2-3 times what we pay here, you still, for a very sophisticated economy in Germany, you still need the government push. Now, I think it'll abate as the ball gets rolling, but I would say for the next 5-10 years, if government tries to stand by, whether it's state and or federal, it's not going to happen. Because I don't think, especially in this country, we don't really have the guts to put any teeth in our legislation. So we'll make all kinds of rules, and then if you don't comply, we'll say, well, sorry, we'll make some more rules. Over, and they don't do that over there. You don't comply, you pay.
One last question. Yes?
So I'd like to ask you a question because you just mentioned about plug power valve has seen a surge in interest this year, but we also know that last month actually, Clear Edge Power filed for bankruptcy, and although you do not necessarily represent the fuel cell side, you represent the hydrogen generation and electrolysis side of it. But why not at this juncture of ag tech and energy, why do you think fuel cell industries are not looking at the obvious application of agriculture? And especially in my business, it is a very important one to keep the cost down, especially with the state regs that's available. The 2013, we passed the virtual net metering. Why can't we take advantage of that and provide low power to the agricultural businesses? And again, I would like to hear your insight and how can we really, get this perfect match of ag and the energy?
Thank you.
All right, take that. So, well, I've spent time with Rosa, who's big on ag, and she's asked me the same question. So, I think part of the reality of the answer are things aren't cheap enough yet for the agricultural, for the farmers. I get a call from some farmer in the middle of some rural co-op in the middle of this country 6 times a year who says, I got excess, someone put a wind turbine on, I'm thinking of putting a wind turbine on my land or solar, and I want to store the excess and I want to fuel a car, and my first question to him is I say, why do you want to do all that? And the point is, well, I want to save money. Well, I said, nothing you just said is going to save you any money. So, I think the reality is it's a great opportunity and it's a really big need, but it's very disseminated and there's no aggregation of capital, and it's a really, really challenging fiscal play because it wants to be sort of at that lower power level. Those things tend to be 25, 50, 100 kilowatts. And companies like Fuel Cell Energy are trying to make power problems work at 5 megawatts. So I just don't think it's gotten there yet. So it's really hard to work at that level.
Right, it's a timing issue. You can follow up on that question after. So I want to thank our panelists. That was so interesting and informative. Thank you. So now taking off my investor hat and going back to CVG, I want to thank all of you for coming. Closing remarks by Joel Reinbold, who's our co-sponsor of this event. Thank you very much, CCAT NISC. And I also want to thank the sponsors of CVG and our staff who are here today for putting this on so nicely. So quick round of applause before Joel takes over for our staff and our sponsors. And for all of you for coming. Thanks, Joel. Take it away, and then we'll have drinks.
Liddy, thanks very much. And let me just explain very quickly what NISC is. NISC is the Northeast Electrochemical Energy Storage Cluster. This is the energy cluster of the Northeast, and it's the federally sponsored, the U.S. Small Business Administration cluster. We love being part of events like this. This is the event that fills the vacuum between entrepreneurs, technology, and solutions with finance, with money. It's the people that make projects work. So we're absolutely delighted to be part of this and be part of the solution. So I want to say we're glad to be part of this, but we're also glad to be working with Crossroads. So yay, Crossroads. We're thrilled to be working with some of the terrific folks from the Connecticut Technology Council, yay Connecticut Technology Council, let me also say that the participants, the speakers were fabulous. Thank you. I know you've got busy schedules. You were all just terrific and informative, and it was terrific listening to you. I also want to thank all the participants for coming. And I don't know where Rob went. Special thanks to Proton for making your facility available to us and giving us a terrific tour. I also want to thank, I want to mention there's upcoming events. The Education Technology, this is the second Thursday event, July 10, 4:30, and that's in Hartford. There's the 3 summer networking parties. There's 3 of them, Hartford, New Haven, Stanford, August 14th. That's also 4:30. And the social media mobile technology event on September 11, 4:30, and that's in Stanford. Last but not least, I want to thank all of our sponsors. Their sponsors helped make this happen. So once again, thanks everyone, and it was great meeting you.